so we can get this story good there. Okay, I had, because we got another segment we got to fill. I might as well fill it with this. Might as well fill it with more stories. They all can't be about Jeffro.
Thank God.
I remember the first time I met you. You told me the story for 2 hours straight.
I have these weird stories. They've all happened.
And I was like, that can't be true. And then all of a sudden we're live and a fight breaks out right behind us. And I was like, maybe these stories are true.
Maybe some of these stories are true. Oh, Smoky Hill River Festival. Oh, right, good God. Right behind the camera, all of a sudden there's this fight. We're all like, what?
And I was like, these stories are probably true.
We had a woman who, well, okay, I'll back up. I lived in the Swiss Army apartment in D, and my fridge went out. So instead of the landlord getting me a new fridge, just gave me a key to this apartment. And I said, just use the fridge over there. And I'm like, what? So I put all my food, so anytime I needed to get a drink or I needed to get food, I had to leave my apartment, walk across the yard, unlock this apartment, walk through the apartment to use the fridge. Finally, after being in here enough, I'm like, I'll just move in there.
Right.
So eventually I do move in here, which I'll have to say, the professor, Steve Lovesy, we make fun of him. We talk about all the different things, him being involved and in love with transsexual car hops, all these things. Him paying Wendy a couple $100 to fuck him, and then she comes and fucks me instead. There's all sorts of stories. There's all sorts of stories, but if it wouldn't have been for young Steven, as Rob calls him, I wouldn't be in this apartment. So I thank young Steven. That's some more stories. That's a guy.
I gotta meet this guy.
That's a guy. You know, they always talk about, Cosmo Kramer on Seinfeld. This guy's like the real life Cosmo Kramer. Steve was out of his mind, but this is not about Steve, at least in this story. So I moved in here, and there was this little hot blonde chick who moved in over there. And she was, your typical trashy blonde, because I like trashy women. She was your typical trashy blonde.
Because there's always a story with them.
There is always a story. Well, Dog the Bounty Hunter. That's always how it starts and ends. Dog the Bounty Hunter, supposedly, I don't know what the deal was, but Dog the Bounty Hunter had come to Hutch to film part of his reality show. He had hooked up with Barb's bail bonds. And he was going around town, and he was busting people, and he was doing all this stuff. Well, there was one day, me and Rob were over at the gym working out, and I get this call. I get calls from like 50 people that day. They're like, oh my God, Dog the Bounty Hunter's in town. You got to show up. And I'm like, first of all, he's not going to do an interview with me. Because if there's 50 million people out there, what am I going to be able to do to get him to talk to me? And Barb's bail bonds over on 5th Street, kind of catty corner to the Dillons. There's not much room over there. They literally had that entire block shut down because everybody in the room was like, oh, Dog the Bounty Hunter, and they ran like a motherfucker over there. So I just don't even think about it. Who cares, Dog the Bounty Hunter? Not a big deal.
I've had people tell me to interview him on this show.
His PR people and him are interesting folks. So this woman finds out he's out picking people up. She calls him. She calls Barb's bail bonds, and she goes, I have a warrant. Can I come get arrested and be on the TV show? And he goes, sure, come on out. So she shows up. They ran her stuff. They fucking arrested her. Didn't roll one single camera and took her away. So then the apartment obviously is up for rent.
That's ridiculous.
So there's these two guys that move in, and they're big time fucking drug guys. So they move in. They've got all the hot bitches coming in and out of the place. Because, of course, you know, if you're a real good drug dealer, you can get hot women because hot women like their candy. So.
Unless they like guns instead.
That too. But they had guns too. It didn't matter. But one young Steven side story. There was one night me and Rob were in here, and Rob was drinking, and Steve was kind of drinking, and they were going, and Steve was going in and out, and Steve was standing on the front porch, and he would see these hot women going in and out of this, to have this party. He decides he's going over there. Now he's drunk as hell. Which he was drunk as hell 90% of the time. This guy would get plastered, get in a semi, and drive across Kansas. I'm surprised he didn't kill him.
I used to have a drunk neighbor who would climb up my balcony and try and come in when I had parties. And
you had your own young Steven.
We threw him down the stairs, and he never came back.
Well, that's a story. So young Steven goes over there. Well, they con him into buying a broken guitar. So he comes back over here with this broken guitar. And Rob's sitting where Jay's sitting, and he goes, what do you got a broken guitar for, Steve? And he goes, I'm going to break it. And he's like, no, come on, what are you going to do with it? And Steve goes, well, I've got a guitar collection. And we're like, you ain't got no damn guitar collection. Now, he lived in the spare bedroom in the back, in the video editing room, which we nicknamed the blowjob room. He lived back there. Never seen one guitar. He then goes back to prove Rob wrong, and he gets on eBay, and he buys a shit ton of guitars and has them shipped here. Then the next Wednesday, when Rob shows up to go to the gym with me, he's like, is Rob here yet? And I said, yeah. And he goes, send him back. So he goes back, and he's got all these guitars displayed. And he goes, see? I've got a collection. And Rob goes, turns around and walks out. We then hear Steve pick up all these guitars, open the closet in there, and throw them in and shut the door. We never see it ever again. He's just got these guitars. He bought all these guitars to try to prove Rob wrong. Well, why is... This guy's insane. He spent more money on nonsense and shenanigans than I've ever been around. But I will have to say that there were a lot of times that he was drunk, and I would go through his wallet, and he paid for Applebee's. So thank you, Steve, for all the trips to Applebee's. But...
That's a big plus there.
but well,
and this is the confession segment.
This is the confession segment of the show. Well, okay, back to the Jennifer thing. So there's these two guys that move in over there, and big drug guys, and here comes Jennifer's dad or stepdad is like 70, 80. The guy is, the guy's old. He goes over there one day and he pounds on the door and he goes, you gotta let that blonde girl go. And they're like, what? Now the entire apartment, the entire Swiss Army apartment is the size of this room.
What?
It had a kitchen, it had a bathroom, it had a little bit of a bedroom. Size of this room.
That's like a living in a closet.
Lance Chafin, the Midwest Mangler, referred to it as the Swiss Army apartment. So he's like, you gotta let that blonde girl go. And they're like, the fuck? And they're like, get out of here, old man. So they shut the door. He gets in his truck, he drives to the police department, and he goes to the police and he says, there is this blonde woman, neighbor of mine, who is being held captive by these two guys. If you don't do something about it, I'm going to go get a gun and I'm going to do something about it. So the fucking cops go, I guess there's a problem. So they run like a motherfucker. They get the SWAT gear. And they show up and they park outside here on the side of the deal. Well, there's a neighbor who lives lives on the top apartment row at the edge. That's Brittany calling me on video. I don't know why she's calling me on video.
During the radio.
She wants to have a video conversation, so I guess we're having a video conversation. Can you hear me?
Yes, love.
Okay, you're calling us. Why are you calling us?
You're
Are you wanting to
on
talk?
the air.
Are you wanting to talk about Jennifer's crazy stepdad too? Because I could fill you in on this.
I don't know who that is.
Okay, we can talk about young Steven, but you've heard enough young Steven stories.
Are you doing the show?
Yes, I'm still doing the show.
Okay, well, I'll talk to you after that, okay?
Okay. Okay. So this guy sees the SWAT vehicles pull in, and all of a sudden he's like, oh shit. And he runs down the stairs, and he runs over there, and he's like, you guys gotta calm down. And they're like, well, we understand there's somebody being held captive, and there's some problems. And then he's like, no. The guy's just a little insane, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to go check it out. So they go knock on the door. The guys are like, you can come in and look around. Well, of course, they come in, do a spin, and you've seen the whole apartment. They realize nothing's going on, so they go across the way, and they arrest his ass and take him to a fucking insane asylum.
What?
And that's the end of him.
That's ridiculous.
But you want to talk SWAT teams? There's been a SWAT team or two.
Now that's utter nonsense.
That is utter nonsense. Right there. Utter nonsense. The band... This is going to be bad because I don't know how to pronounce their name, which it's not a shock here on this show. Karabas Barakas. That's who they are.
That's who we're talking to?
We're going to talk to them here in a few moments. Karabas Barakas. We'll ask them how they pronounce their name. Young Steven. Another young Steven story before we go to Karabas Barabas. I don't know. We got a couple minutes. I'll tell another young Steven story. Young Steven, and actually to follow up on the night that he bought the broken guitar, Rob and him were sitting there drinking. Now, Steve, big time alcoholic, he doesn't mix drinks correctly. He puts more alcohol than he does soda. So he'll put a shit ton of alcohol, so he'll get you drunk, boom, quick. So Rob's sitting in that chair where Jay's sitting, and he's about out of his fucking, he's about done. He's about ready to pass out. And Steve's sitting over on the couch. Not quite where Nagy's sitting, but kind of proximity. And he's drinking. And he goes, well, I'd have sex with a man. And he goes, but I'd be doing the fucking. And then he leans over there to Rob and he goes, you want some more in your cup? And Rob's like, nope, we're done. I have never seen a guy go from to, hey, I'm ready to go, let's take a spelling bee. He was ready to go. The minute he made the comment about I'll be doing the fucking, Rob sprayed the light, grabbed his keys, he's like, I gotta go. And he got the hell out of here.
I've been getting old.
And then Steve goes back to his bedroom and fucking
Shit.
fucking he's out. So another young Steven story. And before they call, I'll tell this one. I could literally tell an entire 2-hour show of young Steven stories.
Why do you call him young Steven?
It's not old Steven.
Why do we call him young Steven? That is the
nickname for people. Like
young Steven. Okay, young Steven. The reason we called him young Steven, that's a Rob nickname. But young Steven, the reason we call him young Steven is because he would go, before he would go to the gym, he would take a shower, and he would put on all these elixirs and all this stuff on his face. And he was always, smelling good and doing all the stuff because whenever he would leave the house to go out in public, he was going to get laid. He wasn't going to the gym. He wasn't going to go work out. He was going to get laid. And he was always doing all these elixirs and all these things on his face. And he was always trying to look young. And so Rob nicknamed him one day Young Steven. And so it just became the name. He always wanted to be called the Professor. Whenever he was on the radio show, he always wanted to be called the Professor.
Professor X.
Professor Young Steven. Professor Lovesy. We had a transsexual porn star on this show one time.
Oh my goodness.
We had Israel, Sean Gates, sitting at the co-host desk. I was sitting catty corner because this was before we had all this set up. I was like that way. Because I always had the desk to where I could look that way because I had one monitor instead of four. And the only reason why we had the one is because I'm always worried because I say so much shit about everybody that I was going to get assassinated. So I wanted to make sure with the door open, I could see.
I had a nightmare about that the other
I had a radio host one time encourage. I had a radio show encourage listeners to hunt me down and kill me live on the air.
Shit.
He also wished cancer on my mother, but Ed Till, the biggest piece of but he's nowhere. He's out there in Satellite Beach, Florida. He's a cocaine addict, all that stuff. But Young Steven, back to Young Steven. Israel was sitting there, and Steve would come over and he would look. We had the chick on Skype, and he would come over and he was like, "Hey, baby, what would you say if I came to New York and took you out? Do you want a man to buy you flowers?" And all the while, Israel's sitting at the desk going, "It's a man." But that's a fucking dude with a dick. You know, and he's over there just... And Young Steven's like, "I'll buy you flowers, baby. Take you out on dinner dates." And all this... It's just the craziest deal. But we had a lot of good times with Steve, and I'll tell you, Steve would still be here if it wouldn't have been for the fact that he did some shenanigans and ended up having to get shown the door. But Young Steven, man, he's gonna go off and be a big star somewhere. He created a
Where is he now?
I think he's in Wichita, and he's living in an apartment downtown, and he's got himself a woman who he's dating who's a nurse. And as me and Rob like to say, well, at least he found himself a nurse. He is old. So we got that.
And that concludes our...
That concludes